Oh, I think we got one more person here. Hello. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. My name is Naomi Chamberlain, and I'm one of the owners at Napa Bookmine. We are a new and used bookstore downtown, in downtown Napa. If you have not visited us before, we're currently open to the public, which has been really nice to see people, you know, masked, and we require hand sanitizer when people come in. But there were some dark days being a warehouse. We're not cut out to be a warehouse. So I'm happy to be open again to the public. Today is a very, very exciting day. It's Bookstore Romance Day, which was started a few years ago, I think by a bookstore, the Ripped Goddess in Southern California. I'm pretty sure it was their invention. And today we're having a panel, Love in the Time of COVID-19, why we need romance novels more than ever. And I wanted to be the person who was Oh, I'm having feedback, sorry. I wanted to be the person who was representing Napa Bookmine today, because way back in February, I read my very first romance novel, thanks to Stephanie, ending today. Thanks to Stephanie. Our feminist book club. It was awesome. So our feminist book club. It was awesome. Moderating the discussion between Aimee O'Brian, Kilby Blades, and Rebecca Hunter. Throughout this discussion, if you are not an author or moderator, just please keep yourself muted. And you can ask questions in the chat box towards the end of the discussion. I'm sure we'll open it up if you'd rather ask live. Welcome to those of you just joining us. All right, so Sue Brown Moore is a seasoned, comprehensive editor who is on fire about educating and empowering romance authors. She has written many books for writers to become better romance writers. And I'm going to put a link in the chat box to her website, as well as links to all of the authors' books from our website. I hope that you enjoyed the discussion today, and please ask questions and just enjoy, have fun. I'm going to mute myself now.
Thank you so much for joining us today, everybody, and for that great introduction, Naomi. I don't know about all of you, but I am just excited to be around people again, even if it's only virtual. And we're talking romance, which is one of my favorite things in the whole world, and it has really been getting me through this isolation. So give us a virtual raised hand in the chat. Go ahead and drop in the chat if you have been reading a ton of romance books lately. And while you're there, let us know where you're tuning in from, because we would love to know. We are also going to drop in a couple more links for you guys. One is a master list of all the books we're going to talk about today, so that you can easily snag those for your own collections. And I will also drop in the author handles for social media, and we have a couple hashtags. So we would love for you to shout out at us anytime during the event or even after, just letting us know how much fun you had, what you liked the most about it, and of course, what you love about romance. So are you ready to meet our panel? I'm totally ready. So we're going to start with Aimee.
Okay, so I'm Aimee O'Brian, debut author of Steal My Heart with Thule Publishing, and it was released a year ago, last August. I am a Napa local, and Naomi, I love what Bookmine does. I love how you are keeping us connected with books and information and events in spite of everything going on. I'm seriously impressed with how well you do that. You are a real blessing to the community. Thank you.
I think Kilby needs an extra second, so let's go to Rebecca next.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Hunter. I have written some books, maybe I think 10 books now, some for Harlequin, some independently, and I write sexy emotional books, oftentimes funny, more intense.
And I'm Kilby Blades. I'm an author of romance and women's fiction. I've been published since 2017, and thank you for bearing with me through my technical problems. My computer's overheating, so I had to take ice from my ice bucket to ice down the bottom of my computer. I'm just gonna hope that works out. But I'm really excited to be here. I'm also a huge fan of independent bookstores. I am keeping my independent bookstore in business because my kids have nothing else to do. So my 10-year-old has like a $300 a month book habit. And it's like, you know what, he's got like, I'm not paying for camp. So that's what we're doing. So really glad to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Nice.
And thank you to everybody who's tuning in. I think we have a few new people in, so just recap, check the chat if you want links for things and social tags for shout outs. So let's get right to our first question, which is going to the topic of this panel, why read romance, especially now during this pandemic? Well, one of the best things about reading romance is the happily ever after, right? That HEA, you know you're gonna get. It's that feeling of hope after this conflict is so satisfying. But even more than that hope is knowing that it's coming, that dependability. We can depend on romance to make us feel better. So authors, I would love for you to tell us a little more about why you read and write romance, especially now during the COVID pandemic. What makes writing fiction so special for you? What's compelling about it when there are dozens or more of other genres that you could write in or read out there? And readers, while we're talking, feel free to drop us a comment in the chat. We would love to know your #1 reason for reading romance. So for this question, let's start with Kilby.
So, I mean, connection is the basest human emotion. And I think the connection that we choose to form with our partner is the only connection we actually choose to form. We have connections with parents and children and other people who we don't choose, but that moment of choosing the person who is going to be your person is a really exciting moment for me. So I like reading romance because I like having that vicarious experience of people finding their person. And particularly now when everybody feels so disconnected, romance is something that for years and years has helped me feel connected. So I really like being part of a romance community and having romance to fall back on, because I think a lot of people right now don't have a lot to fall back on. So being part of the community has been really important.
Well, I read romance because life is complicated and I work full time and I have family and my mother is 89 and she needs lots of help. I have friends in volunteer work and housekeeping and gardening, and world events are disturbing right now. And when I sit down to read for pleasure, and I read every day, I want to be guaranteed a happily ever after. I want to see the character struggle. I want to wonder how it'll work out. And I want them to work for that happily ever after. But I need that. After the 2014 6.0 earthquake here in Napa, I couldn't read anything but romance. And the lighter the better. Anything I picked up that was too deep and too dark and too heavy, I had to set aside for about 1.5 years after that. And that earthquake was limited to a small region. So COVID-19 is affecting the whole world. So right now, I really feel that we need stories to give us hope. And I write romance because I believe in that hope. I believe hoping for the best and working toward it makes a difference. And everybody deserves an escape from their day-to-day struggles. A few moments when you can step out of your own world into another, where you can be assured that everything is going to work out.
So my answer sort of riffs off both Aimee's and Kilby's. Yeah, I love being pulled into characters. I love character-driven romance, and especially now, I don't see a whole lot of people besides my family, maybe a little too much sometimes. So to really get pulled into someone else's head and feel that connection with someone is a really special kind of escape. And knowing that the book is around the idea that the world can be imperfect and you can have these struggles, but that love is going to sort of win. And I used to read mainly contemporary romance, but I've found that during the pandemic, I've read a lot of historical romance, and also a lot of Harlequin Presents, which is sort of, it's sort of fantasy. It's kind of contemporary, but it's kind of fantasy. And basically it's even more removed from everyday life, and yet it's a controlled world where I understand the rules of it. And so I just love all of that kind of escape. And yeah, that's why I write it and read it.
If any of you have questions as we're going along, please feel free to drop those in the chat and I'll get to them at the end if we have time. Before we go to the next question, I want to talk to each of our authors. We're going to do this interspersed between the questions, so not all at once, but everybody has brought a short excerpt from one of their own stories to share with us. And you can find all of these books in the master list for this event, which we have linked into the chat. I know that one of the stories we're getting a peek at today is holiday themed, and we could probably all use a dose of cool right now. So Rebecca, go ahead and share your excerpt with us.
Yeah, so that's actually why I chose this one, because it's like the opposite of what we in the Bay Area are experiencing right now. I'm going to read from this book, which is called A Winter Wonderland. So yeah, it's holiday themed. And the book is, well, I'm going to read you just a sentence from the back cover so you understand the setup here. It says, "What's worse than a broken down car during a winter storm? When the hot tow truck driver is your ex-boyfriend, the one you left behind." So this is Jason Selena's story, and I'm gonna read from chapter 7. And somehow Jace, for reasons you have to read about, has ended up in Selena's bathroom taking a shower, and he's about to walk out. The door to the bathroom opened, and Selena looked up just as Jace emerged from the steam, with only a towel wrapped around his waist. Oh God, he was gorgeous. Jace filled out in the best way possible, his shoulders wider, his arms bigger. There was a spray of hair across his chest, and the trail down to his towel was a little thicker. Her gaze darted up to his face as her cheeks heated up. No gawking at her high school boyfriend allowed. His too long hair hung over his forehead, uncombed, and his lips quirked up in a smile. "The blanket is a little scratchy," he said. "Got anything else to wear?" He sounded almost apologetic, as if he knew what being nearly naked with her might do for the both of them. Maybe he was just as wary about dragging that up as she was. She shrugged and smiled. I have some flowery beach dresses that might fit." Selena stole another glance at his bare torso as she passed him. She could have married this man. She bit her lip and forced her gaze on the bedroom door. Jace followed her in, dressed in only a towel, the water dripping off his hair. She didn't even need to turn around to know that. The image of him walking out of the bathroom was imprinted firmly in her mind. She opened her dresser drawers, sifting through the shirts and leggings. "It's all on the small side," she mumbled. He bent over her shoulder, peering down into the pile of clothes. What had caught his attention? Then she saw it. Buried deep in the stack was Jace's old high school football sweatshirt. She had kept it all these years. He was right behind her, near enough to feel his breath on her hair. She remembered this, the way it felt to be so close to him, the way she could feel his mood without looking. The electric pull between them grew stronger, and her heart pounded in her chest. Selena pulled out the sweatshirt and handed it to him over her shoulder. "I should have given this back long ago." He didn't move. His breath stopped. After a long pause, he took the sweatshirt, his hand brushing over hers. Then he stepped away, breaking the current between them. So that's my sexy first love reunion story with Jace and Selena, high school sweethearts.
I already want to read that because you started with a shower scene, and that's really exciting.
And it wasn't even both of them in the shower either.
Right? It's the possibility. So that's kind of a trope, right? So let's talk more about tropes, because everybody either loves them or loves to hate them, depending on how you feel about the overusage of certain themes in romance. So authors, tell us about one special romance trope or theme that brings you hope and what makes it so special to you? And readers, we would like to know in chat what your favorite tropes are. What are the things that you just keep going back to over and over? So let's start with Aimee for this one.
So I like lots of tropes, but I honestly love stories with a sense of justice. I love it where villains get their comeuppance. If they're really evil, I like it when they die. So romantic suspense is a personal favorite for me. I want the villains to suffer and the romantic couple to triumph. If it's a serial killer, you definitely want him to die. And I write dark, sexy, funny romance. And there's usually in my own books somebody's doing something really bad, and I love giving them what they deserve. So, and that's true in Still My Heart. But there are lighter tropes that I love. I have one of these I've written, and maybe it will come out next year. But I love it's cheesy. I love the waking up married theme, where they wake up married and they have to make it work. And you know they're gonna make it work. And that's what's so exciting to me. Yeah, so yeah, that's what I like.
I'm also a sucker for that waking up married, especially if it's like you don't remember anything about it. Those are the best.
Oh, yeah.
Kilby, Rebecca, who wants to go next?
So I can speak to tropes that I love. I really, really like enemies to lovers, because I think enemies to lovers stories have the best dialogue. That, like that competitive, like back and forth is always super entertaining. And they're also really fun to write. So I definitely write those. But in terms of stories that give me hope, probably friends to lovers and even best friends to lovers. Mainly because I think relationships, like real life relationships, are really complicated. And how often has it happened that you meet the right person at the wrong time? I mean, that's what the whole like second chances thing is about. It's not always the right time. So when characters already know each other and are in each other's lives and have an intimate relationship, but then they find that right time to be with one another, I really love that. I wrote one book. My most recent release is called Spooning Leads to Forking, which is, it's a friends to lovers. She's got, the heroine is a former food critic, and she's trying to get away from her husband, who doesn't understand that she doesn't want to be married anymore. And throughout, as the book progresses, the time comes when she can be with the hero. I wrote a best friends to lovers called Atom Bomb, which is a gay romance, which is also about, they've been best friends for a long time. So they have this complicated relationship, but underneath it all, they've been in love with each other all these years. So I love those stories where the relationship is one thing, but then becomes something better and becomes what it should be.
Kilby, the title "Spooning Leads to Forking" is like the best title I've ever heard. I love enemies to lovers also. I love first love stories, and I was trying to think about why I love it so much. And it's not necessarily just you have someone, in your past that the sort of near miss, because that's part of it. But for me, part of it is also the idea that you sort of can go back in your life to a time when you were younger, maybe didn't know, when you were at a different point in your life, and you can pick up loose ends and make things that didn't go right the first time. You have a second chance at that. And so I really like that idea, and really playing with it in the romance, the sort of healing of past wounds as well. That gives me hope.
Okay, are you guys ready for another excerpt? So I always love a story with guaranteed built-in conflict, because, in fact, I think we heard this in some of the descriptions of books so far. Like, you can just hear that trope and know kind of what you're going to get, that experience you can expect, which is part of what I love about romance. And Aimee has something right along those lines to share with us today.
Okay, so Steal My Heart is a cop cat burglar naughty romance. And I'm going to start right at the beginning and read you about the first 3 pages. I wanted this. Carefully, I lined my lips, I picked up my lipstick tube, twisting up the scarlet cover. My hand trembled. I dropped the lipstick, laid my palms flat on the vanity, and drew a breath. Sex with a cat burglar. My fantasy would come true tonight. I drew on black stockings, the shimmery, soft nylon, slip sliding over my fingers, over my smooth skin, gliding up past my knees to my thighs. With a soft click, I snapped them on my garter belt. I stood in red stilettos and shimmied into my black leather miniskirt before checking out my reflection in the gilt-edged full-length mirror. My dark hair was sleek and down for once, falling past my skimpy black bra, brushing my mid-back and sending little tingles over my skin. Would he like it? I shook my head. That didn't matter. I'd played out Mark's kinky fantasy. Now it was my turn. We'd worked it out, scripted it. He would break in at 3 a.m., dressed completely in black, his face hidden. We'd only gone on a couple of dates, but of course I would know him by his build, his blue eyes, his touch, and I would pretend I didn't. I would put away everything I knew of Detective Mark Finney and imagine a stranger's touch on my flesh, a stranger's lips on mine, a stranger's teeth scraping my jaw. I would imagine a cat burglar's nimble fingers removing my clothes, bury me before him. It was not so far-fetched as fantasies went. A series of burglaries have plagued Los Angeles all summer, and while I personally might not own anything worth stealing, the house where I was staying had a safe full of priceless jewelry. For 2 weeks, I was house-sitting the Brentmore estate. I would never have a better opportunity. I heard the soft slide of a window frame and glanced at the clock. He was early. I sucked in air even as I shivered in the slight breeze. Time for action. I scrambled onto the four-poster bed, the burgundy velvet spread draping over black satin sheets and a fluffy down comforter. I turned the covers down and positioned myself just so and waited, listening. Was that a step on the stairs or just my heart pounding? This was my moment, and damn it, I couldn't hear a thing. Not a breath, not a whisper. What was Mark doing? Teasing me. That was it. Making me wait for what I wanted. I couldn't stand it. In a brush of leather against satin, I slid off the bed. Teetering in 4-inch heels, I crept to the top of the stairs and held my breath. Did I hear him? I stepped down the thickly carpeted stairs, careful to keep my balance in the unfamiliar dark. I tilted my head. Using intuition more than a sense of hearing, I walked toward the front hall. Was that him moving through the house as if on a sigh? God, he was good. I'd never have heard him if I hadn't have been listening, expecting him, anticipating. I moved across the massive foyer, slid open the door to the parlor and caught my breath. He stood before me, light from the moon illuminating his gloved hand. He wore all black as promised, a bad boy, a criminal, and mine for the night. Because tonight, I wasn't Lexanne Harris, police detective, law-abiding and responsible. Tonight, I was wanton.
Oh, I love that. That planned charade element, that's not something I see a lot. That's pretty exciting.
Didn't go quite how she planned.
Still really exciting and fun. So let's talk a little bit more about tropes before we move on. And in this question, I want to talk about authors. Tell us about a scene or a story where you've taken a well-loved trope, theme, or character type and added your own modern twist. And if it's already been published, how are readers reacting to that scene or that story? Let's start with Rebecca this time.
So in my book that came out in March called Hotter on Ice, I did Beauty and the Beast. Now, I love Beauty and the Beast as a trope, and I read that all the time. But the original story is actually it's a little disturbing when you sort of break it down, or when I broke it down to write it, which is really that person's outer appearance is a direct reflection on their internal state, right? And in the fairy tale, when the beast has made amends for past wrongs, he transforms into this beautiful prince. and so, but I wasn't really comfortable with this idea that in order to have a good heart, you had to look a certain way, right? So, and I see this, and so I see this idea being questioned more in romance. So I wrote a man who had been physically scarred and then also emotionally scarred by a traumatic moment when he was on the Australian Federal Police. And a man on his team died, and he has a deep weight of responsibility for that. And his progression is, instead of a transformation of into, like, he doesn't lose his scars at the end, if that's not a spoiler, but that it's more about coming to terms with the fact that the scars, which are represented by the external one, but also from the internal ones, that you can overcome those, that he's not permanently scarred. And then I put him with a model who is the sort of definition of standard, typical, or conventional beauty. But she is constantly struggling with this idea that she is interpreted, therefore, as not struggling with anything else. And she has deep emotional scars. So I wanted to play with that and sort of twist the idea of Beauty and the Beast to something a little bit less, to question some of the ideas actually in that classic story. And here's the book. I'll show you the book.
Aimee, you want to go next?
So I just have the one book out, and I mixed several tropes into that first book. It is, at its core, it's a cop story, but in my story, the female protagonist is a cop. Usually it's a guy, but she's a cop. She's the badass, and she's acting out her sexual fantasy, and so we have a whole mistaken identity problem come up. And to really change it up, the story is all in the first person. It's a limited viewpoint. We only have her point of view, her voice and her perspective, which can be biased and skewed. And so I did some things to get his viewpoint in. She starts doing things she shouldn't be doing. Like I said, it's a naughty book. So she does a lot of things she shouldn't be doing. So she bugs his office. And so that was a nice little plot device to find out what he was thinking and what was going on with him. But the further we go down, the more skewed and biased her viewpoint becomes. And you can't be sure that you're trusting the narrator. And it was a lot of fun to write. And it's very fast-paced, it's very escapist, it's a very sexy romp.
So after you answer Kilby Good, just go ahead and go into your excerpt, since it's a surprise to me too. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, sure, awesome. Well, in terms of tropes that I kind of turned on their head, I really wanted to write a woman who was a billionaire, and I really wanted to write a more realistic billionaire. Because I think a lot of times when you read billionaire tropes, that they have a lot of money and they're like the CEO of something, but they don't seem to work very much. Like they never seem to, like, I don't know, like sometimes they're heirs, but sometimes they just like have these big highfalutin lives, but somehow have time to do all sorts of things. So in my debut novel, Snapdragon, which is a friends with benefits story, I made her a billionaire. And I gave her all sorts of like real world billionaire problems. Like she actually does work a lot. One reason why it's friends with benefits is because she doesn't have time for a relationship because she works a lot. She earns a lot in her own job, but she also inherited some money. And she deals with a lot of people who believe that her privilege was unearned, and she's struggling with being really good at what she does and being a woman and having a misogynist boss, and everybody judging her for the billions of dollars she inherited from her parents and her father, who is a crooked senator in Illinois, because this takes place in Chicago. So I really like the idea of showing, I think there's a way to show elite worlds and to show all of the lifestyle elements that are exciting about elite worlds, but also show the problems of the people who live in elite worlds. At one point, she's dealing with the paparazzi. So I really liked showing a more realistic billionaire. And people really liked the fact that they felt that it was a feminist book. I still get a lot of really nice compliments about how, oh wow, it was really nice to see the role reversal, how all of the power in the relationship didn't belong to him. Even though he had his own big career, it was clear that she really had her own life going on, that in no way, like nothing about being with him other than what was inside of him made her life better. She didn't need anything that he had in order for her to be awesome. So that was Snapdragon. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Gail. Okay, so I'm going to read from a different book. This book is called Crazy Old Money, and I love that we're talking about holiday romances. Holiday romances are perfect. Just a side note, I don't know whether anybody saw that like Hallmark brought back some of their holiday television, like some of their Christmas movies. They had a period a couple of months back where it's not Christmas, but they were like, you know what, everybody needs this right now. So I'm totally with you, Rebecca, on the holiday romances. So this is a story about a hero. His name is Marsh, and he is bringing home his girlfriend who he wants to ask to marry him over the course of the weekend for Thanksgiving, but he has avoided telling her that he is a billionaire, and he has avoided bringing her home to Connecticut to his family because he is embarrassed of his money and he is embarrassed of his family. And she's Black and he's white, and he's deeply afraid that his casually racist family is going to say something wrong. And in fact, he wouldn't be bringing her home at all because he has like a pushy 80-year-old grandmother who is like, you've got to come home for Thanksgiving. So he's like very nervous about how things are going to go. Oh, and she just realized after arriving at the grandmother's mega estate and seeing all these paintings with like corgis and like people with hunting rifles that he is quite wealthy. And at the moment that this picks up, she's upset about the fact that she just found this out. Okay, so it's from Jada's point of view. And this starts out with her internal thought. What's with you and that fake ass laugh? Jada telepathically asked her boyfriend. When Marsh brought his A game, his feigned interest was much, much better than this. He'd accompanied her to scores of work functions, boring ones. He'd beamed interest at far less entertaining stories. He'd given performances worthy of Academy Awards. It scared her a bit that the inimitable Marsh Brewster was so far off of his game that his performance could barely get him nominated for a Razzie. That's Marshall Brewster IV, she reminded herself sardonically, even as she chastised herself again not to judge. He could no sooner change the fact that he was the fourth Marshall as she could change that she was the first Jada. He hadn't asked to be born to grandparents who were loaded, and she could understand why he wouldn't talk about his own privilege. But he could have made it so I didn't find out a half an hour ago. Where do you summer? Minnie asked brightly, her perma smile still in place. Jada was relieved to be asked a question, anything to get her out of her own head. Tonight she would be too tired and hurt to deal with all of this. Don't go to bed mad was bad advice for people like Jada, people who needed to cool down. Marsh knew this about her, and tomorrow they would talk. Summer's sort of an East Coast thing, Jada replied smoothly. West Coasters vacation throughout the year. Minnie laughed a bit drunkenly and brought the fingers of her free hand up to play at the jewel anchoring her necklace, seeming unable to grasp Jada's point. What I mean is, Jada said more slowly, that the lifestyle in California isn't really to go to a summer house. People buy houses in Tahoe, but even that's more of a go there on the weekend kind of thing. Well, you have to join us in the vineyard one year. Have you ever been to Vineyard Haven? No, I don't think I have, Jada said with a polite smile. I think you'll like it, Uncle Stephen chimed in. He raised his glass and gave Jada a little wink. It's becoming very diverse. As Jada set her lips in an appropriately graceful smile, Marsh's arms stiffened around her waist. Why don't we, Marsh started, already beginning to step them away. But Stephen interrupted him and leaned in toward Jada conspiratorially. Did Marsh ever tell you about the time I sat next to Morgan Freeman on a plane? Jada didn't think the soft groan that came from Marsh's direction was a figment of her imagination. No, he didn't. Jada's voice was laced with practiced delight. Smiling up at Marsh, Jada saw that his face was reddening by the second. She squeezed his bicep reassuringly. So I'm in first class from De Gaulle to Kennedy, and I meet this nice-looking gentleman, you know, very well-spoken, very educated, Stephen started in. As Stephen went on about how impressive the man was and how interesting it was to hear his life story as they ate off of china crossing the Atlantic, Marsh looked increasingly miffed and mortified, because being the only Black girl at a party and people jumping at the chance to tell you about Black people's stories was kind of a thing she bitched about, and therefore a thing that Marsh knew she hated. Presumably the exact kind of thing Marsh had apologized for in advance in the car.
That is the perfect segue to our next question, which is about empowering diverse romance. Romance has always been a progressive genre to some extent. Even way back in the day, the settings might have been a little conservative, but the underlying themes of romantic fiction were subversively progressive and empowering for women specifically. Today's authors don't have to be quite so sneaky with their messages, which is great. So authors, if you could tell us about some progressive ways you're celebrating love and self-identity in your books and what you hope readers will take away from that experience. And readers, we would love to know in the chat what you want to see more of along these lines of progression and self-identity. Let's start with Aimee.
So I like writing strong women. I really enjoyed writing a woman who knew what she wanted, and she didn't apologize for it. And she's very motivated and she's very strong, and she just goes for her goals. So often we see a lot of angst and women apologizing, and she doesn't do any of that. And I don't know that the book is particularly diverse in that, but it does, I think it's empowering to women. And she owns her mistakes as she makes them throughout the book, and she makes a lot of them, but she owns them. But I do believe that the key to welcoming diversity in our own writing is to read more, and that I know that what I read influences my creative output, and that the more I broaden my reading, the more those influences broaden my writing. And I read mostly romance, but I read every kind of romance that lands in my lap. So moving forward, as more books land and more diverse romances are out there and accessible, all those influence will start showing up in my own writing as well.
I can speak a little bit about that. So, so my family is not all white, not all cis, het, able-bodied, my friendships, my community. And so since the beginning, my books have reflected that, and I usually have a cast of characters that come from a lot of different backgrounds. I think that more recently, I write for independently, but also for Harlequin. And with Harlequin, I had to kind of take a look at that and decide and weigh a little bit. Should I be the person representing different ethnicities, or should I not do that in order to sort of pressure Harlequin to hire authors of color? So I kind of had a little bit of I had some internal struggle about that as an author. I think in the end, what I decided was that I wouldn't sell on diverse characters. I would sell when I'm selling my first book, I would sell it on white characters. But then my books will always reflect sort of the world that I live in, the world I want to live in. More recently, a friend on Facebook, who shares a lot about violence on the gay community, and specifically on the trans community, sort of made some comments about that. And so it made me think, you know what, I do put gay characters in, but never, I haven't put a trans character into my books, even as a secondary character. And so I thought, you know, that's probably something that I'd really like to do. And, you know, and just presented as this is the world we live in. This is the world that I want to live. So I think that for me, this is a very long-winded way to say that for me, I want to create the world that I want to live in, with its problems, but, and try to represent it in a nuanced, realistic, but yet also sort of romance fantasy way. So that's sort of my white take on it.
How you doing, Kilby? You ready?
Oh, I would say, yeah, sorry, the sun is moving, so I'm moving with the sun. I would say, so it's interesting because so many things that are wonderful about romance is that they are about the worlds that we want to live in. And a lot of the romance that I consume is that reflection of the world that I want to live in. But in terms of the approach that I take with my own writing, I think I almost go in the opposite direction. A lot of times that's a risky place to go, because I think that a lot of the traditionally published romance industry wants less of the world that we do live in. But I really like to represent the full spectrum of real life external problems that my characters have. So I think a lot of times what we see in romance are idealized worlds and characters who have these external struggles. So like in a Hallmark movie, you would never, you know, no one ever dies, nobody's ever over 55, and you know, there's certain problems that nobody ever has. I would say that I write characters whose their inner worlds are strong, their inner confidence is strong, but they do really have these things that are happening in the external worlds that are their things to overcome. So, you know, I am not neurotypical, so I write characters who have the same neurodiversities that I do. I am not white cis het, so I write about the problems that I have in my entire life, and I like bringing that realism into my work, and my readers really like it. The industry does not always believe that readers will like it.
Which I hope is something that's changing as the industry sees more of these realistic stories successful in the indie marketplace specifically. Hopefully traditional publishing will follow behind more quickly than is traditional.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now, what I've seen, at least from friends announce, this is not a scientific study, but friends who are announcing on, you know, on social media about book deals they've gotten, it feels like right now is a time of what I would think of as market correction, right? That we are starting to see with the Black Lives Matter movement, and or I should say, Black Lives Matter movement has been going on for a long time. The more, the higher profile of the Black Lives Matter movement, it has really gotten the publishing industry to given some momentum to take responsibility for that. Now there's a long way to go in that, but it feels like there's movement in that direction, which to me is really encouraging.
Yes, definitely. And along other channels too, even though people have had the right to marry who they want to in many states for years now, traditional publishing doesn't always keep up with that reality. There are some boutique publishers that specialize in queer romance, but I think we are starting to see more of that in mainstream as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody get their own happily ever after that they can personally connect with, no matter who they are. So hopefully that future is not too far away for us. So along that same line, just really fast, because I want to get to the wine question. We're going to pair a wine with books, so don't go anywhere. That's coming up. But right before that, because I'm really interested in finding more diverse reads. It can be tough because, like we were talking about traditional publishing, which is where, like, if you're going to some of these sites, you don't always see what you're looking for. So authors, can you give us some advice on how you find new to you stories and authors and themes that you want to expose yourself to, that you want to help celebrate and support? Let's start with Kilby this time.
So the one thing that I wish readers knew is that a lot of the it's absolutely wonderful that we have so many more authors who are not white, cis, het, kind of dominating romance. It's extremely positive, and every author who we're seeing and hearing about are authors who have absolutely earned their place. But I think that what a lot of authors don't realize is how the kind of marketing side works. So a lot of the authors that we're seeing are authors who are traditionally published, and because a lot of the inequity in publishing has come forth, those are authors who are publishing at a time when their publishers are very interested in showing how they're supporting authors of color. So I think I'm happy that there's more attention to the issue, but for me, the reality has been that about 95% of authors from marginalized groups actually aren't helped by this at all. It's really the authors who are repped by the big houses who are getting them an O magazine and getting them PR placements. So my advice is to look beyond the authors that you're hearing about everywhere, because the top 10, top 20 lists, every place you go, it's like the same 10 to 20 authors. I would say scratch the surface and go beneath. So like for me, the go-tos would be, look at awards. The gay community has the Lambda Awards. The Black author community has the Emma Awards. Look at authors who are being recognized in smaller circles. A lot of them are indie, and a lot of them are frankly trying to get traditionally published, and they can't get traditionally published. I would also look at critical reviews. So Book Life does critical reviews for indie authors. And that's something that if you're an indie author, you can throw your hat in the ring and get and by the way, Book Life is owned by Publishers Weekly, so you can get a Publishers Weekly review. So I would encourage you to look in arenas where there's not like a traditional publishing gatekeeper that's determining whether someone's going to show up somewhere. Find some place where the indie authors have access and look for authors who are getting recognized in those spaces.
So that's a really good suggestion, Kilby. Of course. I was thinking when I heard this question, so right now there's a ton of author events like this going on. And I attended some of, like Alyssa Cole has a date night series where she's inviting some different authors to chat with her. And so I went on one of her date nights because I was curious about one author. And then there was another author, Vanessa Riley, who was talking, she has a book out called A Duke, a Lady, and a Baby. And she started talking about the book, and it has an amputee hero that was a Duke. And to me, I was like, oh, I totally want to know about this guy, right? And so to me, connecting with a book often, it takes me hearing someone telling me and like me really honing in on what when a book has what I want, my catnip, but I need to be actively exposing myself and being really conscious to think about, okay, I'm going to attend events that do have marginalized authors as well. And then also the other place I thought about was the library. I feel like going to a library these days, the physical library can be very dominated by the traditionally published authors. But these days, a lot of books on Overdrive, they access some of the indie channels that indies can get in. It's complicated, but anyways, so you can try indie books, and you can try ones that you're not sure, you just want to test some different authors. And so if you've heard of someone, looking it up on on the library and giving a book a try there. Oftentimes they don't have the full catalog, but you can get a sense of whether or not that author is a good match. So I feel like those are, to me, those are the two places where I really discover a lot of new authors. And there's even a librarian here today who would do an amazing job, I think, of pointing us to indie authors. So.
Myself, I think I depend mainly on recommendations from people. I don't have a lot of time because I work full time and I take care of my mother. And I depend a lot on recommendations and what people are talking about. I did really enjoy checking out, the Rip Bodice has awards that they give out in February, and they have a lot of really interesting books that win in their contest. So I like looking at the contest and seeing who's winning, and just paying attention to the books that my friends are talking about, because my friends are mostly romance writers, and they're talking about a lot of diverse books right now. And I'm really, really interested in reading not the same story all the time. Romance is a broad genre, but I think it could be broader.
Yep, I agree. I just went blank. I had something I was going to contribute and I forgot. Oh, yeah, now I remember. I'm going to answer this question too, because I used to be a blogger, and there are bloggers that specialize in everything. So if you are interested in a specific kind of story, whatever that is, there is probably a blogger out there that covers that. And many of them cover indie and less well-known authors, because it's easier to connect with bloggers than it is the big publications. So like when I was a blogger, I connected with a lot of people who weren't very well known. And it's really eye-opening to see the quality of work that is out there that we just don't know about because they're not getting in the big channels. So just do a Google search for, you know, X blog or blogs about, reviews about whatever books you're looking for. So, okay, we are super low on time, but we have to talk about wine. So authors, give us a couple pairings, and I've asked them to do 2 each. And this is one that's a pairing with a wine pairing with one of their own books, and one that is a wine pairing with somebody else's book. And I think almost all of these books can be found in that master list that we linked earlier, but if not, we can get those added. Okay, so let's start with Kilby, because I see you sipping on some sparkling there, and I'm a little bit jealous. I think your volume's off.
Excuse me. I really, really like wine. I have written a culinary romance series. I used to be a food, wine, and travel writer. I really like wine. So the pairing that I would recommend for one of my own books, so I've got this bottle. I'll let you see it right here. Oh, you can hardly see it because I'm having such weird sunlight problems. Okay, this is called Machete. So if anybody knows, this is a red blend. It's a Grenache-based red blend. If you like wines from like the Southern Rhone, a lot of times the wine, the grapes are like Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, and it's a really, really good blend. Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Gigondas, Vaqueira, or that blend. But this is one that is from California, and the winemaker who makes this wine is the same winemaker who makes The Prisoner, for folks who know The Prisoner, which is also a really, really tasty red blend. And what I like about a Grenache-based red blend is that it's a wine that goes well with food. Like it goes well with kind of like a nice roasted chicken, something that's really herbaceous, kind of like a light to medium meat. So you can have it with food and have a really wonderful dinner, but it also works really well as a cocktail wine. So since my book, The Secret Ingredient, is it's a celebrity chef and it's about food, I like this wine because it's great for food, or it's just great if you feel like drinking wine. Another book that I would recommend that I can't hold up and show you because I mostly read ebooks. There's a book called The Good Enough Husband by Sylvie Fox. And I love this book because it's a book about a woman who leaves her husband, and she meets a man while she's off with her dog, like figuring out how to leave her marriage and reimagine her life. And the romance with the new guy, who's a vet, of course, the vet helps her dog while she's on a road trip. But what I love about it is that it talks about the complex nature of ending a relationship because her husband really doesn't understand why she doesn't want to be married anymore. And I love that for some reason. So my pick for that, I've got it chilling on ice and that's what I'm drinking, is the Schramsberg, sorry, you can hardly see it because of my lighting. It's the Schramsberg Blanc de Noir. And if you've never had the chance to go to the Schramsberg winery and visit the caves, you are completely missing out. Like literally put it on your bucket list. Schramsberg is my happy place. I could tell you a couple of stories about me in Schramsberg. But the reason why I like it for The Good Enough Husband is because The Good Enough Husband is set in California. She's from LA and she drives up the Pacific Coast Highway, and the man who she meets in the Sonoma area, and there are all these scenes where they're on the beach eating oysters. So I love this because this is a great wine to pair with oysters and to just sit on the coast and really enjoy life. So those are my pairings, and I'm gonna have some more.
I knew I was jealous for a reason. Oh, that Schramsberg is so good. Okay, let's move on to Aimee.
So living here in the Valley, I become very partial to our local wine, so I'm only going to talk about local wine. And wine inevitably plays a role in all my stories. Certain things always appear in the stories: wine, shoes, flowers, food. So for Steal My Heart, okay, so Steal My Heart, I paired it with Rare Cat Sparkling. My friend from work got me started on Rare Cat. She gave me a bottle for Christmas. And then when I started writing a cat burglar story, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to put this wine in the book. So it does appear in the book. And I'm going to quote from their tasting notes here. It is made in the method traditionnelle with green apple, citrus, ginger, and floral notes. And like Steal My Heart, it is bright with a clean mouthfeel and a lively finish. So I love tasting notes for pairing with books because they can be quite funny. So for my book recommendation wine pairing, I'd like to go with one of Rachel Herron's books. A few years ago, before I was published, I was really struggling with how to make my writing more compelling. And I was trying to figure out what that meant. And then I read her book, and I believe it came out in 2016. It was called The Ones That Matter Most. And it is both compelling and complex. And it starts out feeling very slow in that you have a widow and she has this desk that belongs to her husband, and the desk takes center stage. And the more she goes through this desk with its little drawers and its little cubbies and its little hiding places, the more she discovers about her husband that she did not know. And the book is very emotional, and it would get to be too much and I would set it down, but I couldn't leave it there. I had to keep picking it back up to read it. And that's compelling. And so I wanted to pair it with something that I think is also equally compelling. We've been a member of Flora Springs for a lot of years. And so I wanted to pair it with the Flora Springs Flagship Wine, which is their trilogy. And I am drawn to this wine again and again. They describe trilogy as lingering with a satisfying finish, or satisfactory finish. And that is how I would describe Rachel's books as well. And I even in this bottle, I actually picked a 2016 because that's the year that her book came out.
So appropriate.
So you should have gone with me first because mine is super anticlimactic. So this is the wine I always drink. It goes with everything, I think. It's Bonterra, and it's from up in the Mendocino area. And I'm going to be totally honest here. I usually go to the store and I select the organic wine that looks the most compelling to me. And that's how I choose wine. So I'm pairing it with everything today. My book, A Winter Wonderland. And then I was going to recommend Destiny's Captive. I read this recently. This is a Beverly Jenkins. She's written a ton of historical romances. And as I said, I've been on a super historical romance kick. So this one, you go off to Cuba in the 1800s during the revolution, or the uprising was not successful, I think. So the uprising, and you go to Florida, you go to California during the Rancho period, and it's in California. So therefore I have a California wine, and that's about as close as I can come to a good pairing. So that's it.
I think you just summed up how like 90% of the population chooses wine, so don't feel bad about that. It's pretty, right? I need it. Well, that is it for today's panel. Thank you to all of you for coming and for staying till the very end. I hope you got some great book recommendations and some good wine recommendations, and I hope you will hit us up on social. We would love to hear from you and get to know you better. That book list is in chat if you would like to get your hands on these books we've been talking about. And that's going to be it for us. I think we want the panel and Naomi to hang around just a little bit after so we can wrap up, but the rest of you go have some great books and some great wine.
Yeah, and thanks so much I keep seeing these comments flowing through, and I can't respond to them on my phone, but I'm super excited that you are all here. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.